And Christian tells us, it's not clear, however, how Molinism escapes the same problem of the simple foreknowledge view by introducing middle knowledge, right? No matter what the circumstances are, is it possible for God to infallibly know the indeterminate counterfactual choices of his creatures without violating their freedom? Right? That's the problem. So he quotes Hasker here, right, who says, with regard to a possible free choice that is never actually made, there are truths about what the creature might possibly do in that situation, and perhaps truths about what the creature would probably do, but there is no truth stating what one would definitely do.
Right.
So we're kind of up in the air, as it were, right?
We can always, can we choose something that would invalidate God's knowledge? It seems like if we're libertarian free will advocates, we have to say yes. We have the ability to trick God. He might know us really, really well, but if we can have the possibility to do the opposite, can we invalidate God's foreknowledge in whatever capacity there? Seems like that might be the case. So furthermore, since the counterfactuals of creaturely freedom are relevant only prior to God's decreeing the world, so boom, starting off, that he chooses to actualize or create. Once that world was decreed, nothing could prevent, and so he gives, for instance, nothing could prevent the 9/11 terrorist attacks from using libertarian freedom in the actual here and now to renege on the whole plan and plunge their planes into the upper bay near the Statue of Liberty at the last moment. So it seems to remove that.
I mean, if they have libertarian free will, is what the point he's trying to make is, if they have libertarian free will, even the world that God chooses where they would do these various things, they could still do other things if they have libertarian free will. That's the point he's trying to make. Right.
So it seems that their libertarian freedom in the actual world is an illusion. The only freedom that people appear to have is confined to the mind of God, this middle knowledge, before the world is actualized. And again, actualized by who or by what? Because there seems to be, but before God creates, how is there something to look at without actualizing it?
It's all in the mind of God. And so, so the point here is, if they really have free will, then there's nothing that God can do to change it. If he chooses to decree a world where he knows what they're gonna do, then do they really have free will?
Yeah, right. So we're confined to the mind of God prior to his decreeing the world that to make. They have no freedom to change what he has already decreed, rendering libertarian free will kind of a moot point. Like, we kind of think we have free will, but we really don't, according to this idea. Thus, it's hard to see how there can be real knowledge of counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, because it happens prior to decree. God set it in motion. This is what will happen. I've looked down the corridors of time. This person will choose it. I've decreed it. And there, you think you have the ability to eat vanilla ice cream, but unfortunately, by you eating chocolate, you realize you have a tooth decay, and then you go to the dentist, which lets you meet your wife, and you fall in love and have 3 children, and one of those children is baby Hitler. Oh, man, if only chocolate ice cream. But guess what? You didn't choose the vanilla, so fortunately, you caused baby Hitler. Congratulations. But you really didn't, because you just think you had the ability to choose. Right. This is removed.
So he gives us a different example. His example, God's so-called middle knowledge of counterfactuals of freedom would include this particular example. If Adam were placed in the Garden of Eden and tempted by Satan, he would sin, right? That's his knowledge of counterfactual freedom of the world, right? This is what will happen if Adam is placed. So according to Molinism, this truth must be contingent, that is, dependent on what the person Adam would do. So it must be known beforehand and thus independent of, that is, logically prior to God's decree to create the world that this is happening in. But notice, how can God know that this statement is true? On what factual basis, and this is kind of the issue that you raised a minute ago, on what factual basis can he know it to be a legitimate truth claim? It can't be grounded, and here's the issue, grounding, right? It can't be grounded in God's nature, right, his natural knowledge, because God's nature is necessarily what is. So this isn't what is, it's contingent. And so it cannot be grounded in contingent truths, which depend on the future acts of free agents. Otherwise, that makes God dependent on his creatures. And it can't be grounded in God's decree, his free knowledge, because that would imply that Adam's choice was determined by God. And of course, Molinism denies that free choices are determined by God. So there's a conundrum here that this position finds itself in, right? There's no ground for the position, is what he's trying to say, right?
So you kind of remove the grounding in order to continue to have this idea that, I mean, it seems attractive kind of deal, but once we kind of think about it a little bit more, we see that we run into issues. And, for Molina to come about, I mean, he was this counter-Reformation person, so he's looking for explanations to kind of deny this movement coming up within what he's trying to respond to. And so middle knowledge is coming out as a counter-Reformation idea. Not saying that he didn't, believe it, but it seems to be done for a purpose, at least. So that should at least be known on the table. So furthermore, it cannot be grounded in Adam's nature or any such creature either, Satan or the angels or Uncle Bob or whoever it might be, since the essence of this statement must be true prior to God's decree to create such creatures.
Right. So notice it can't be grounded in Adam's nature because because Adam doesn't even exist.
Right, yeah, right.
So it can't be grounded in his nature, right?
Why didn't God change his nature? Yeah, something like that. Therefore, middle knowledge lacks any grounds whatsoever, and this is absurd, since we ordinarily assume that contingent truths about creatures have grounds. So something is dependent on something. There's a grounding for that. There's the choice. There's the reason for it, unless we are given a very good reason to think otherwise.
Right.
So the robbing the bank example. The person goes in and they don't have a choice because the bomb is strapped to them. Okay, well, they don't really have something to choose otherwise because it's kind of being made for them there. So middle knowledge appears to be a kind of knowledge that exists independently of creation. Okay, so that's what we're trying to kind of get to almost. And it's also independently of God himself. So where does this give us? So who must be the source of all knowledge? Yeah. If not God, then who?
Right. Where did all this come from?
If God is kind of, so he's restrained himself and he's looking down the corridors of time, it's independent of God, it's independent of creation. So it seems to be like God's using the cards he's dealt. But who's the dealer? Who's handing out these cards to him that God goes, yes, I've got my jack and my ace. I'm in good standing here. I think I'll go ahead with this world right here. Thank you, dealer.
Yeah. Right. So Molinism obviously has other problems, he says. But even if it offered a coherent account of human freedom, divine foreknowledge and providence, it would not escape the problem of divine culpability, right? In other words, blaming God for Adam's sin and the whole introduction of evil into the world. Molinists must say that God considered all feasible worlds among the possible worlds, right? What people would do and that sort of thing, including in the world that Adam would truly choose sin, and that he then decreed that world anyway, knowing, right, that Adam would do this, right? And since God acted in a way that would ensure Adam's sin, Molinism has the same trouble that Calvinism does in escaping the charge that God caused him to do it, right? Yeah. Because that's the world he created.
Yeah.
Right?
And so even if you kind of step back and say, okay, well, the Calvinist position is that, God uses the ends and the means in order to carry out his will. You just have the opposite in the Armenian worldview, the Molinism worldview too, because by God not taking action, doesn't he also have some sort of culpability? He could change it if he wanted to, but he chooses not to for whatever reason.
Yeah, or he could have chosen a different world where Adam didn't sin.
Right.
The fact that he chose the world where Adam sinned this point he's trying to make is that God then becomes the cause of the sin, and God is culpable, that is blamable for the sin, right? That's the problem. So they haven't escaped the, God is causing sin problem of the problem of evil, right? They've kind of come at it from a different angle, right?
And there are responses that Reformed people have to these charges as well, and we're just covering the slice of life here. And again, What About Free Will is other book, and again,
and he's going to deal with these in his particular position.
I mean, he has to, right? Because he's kind of chopping down the redwood, and he's wanting to plant the tree differently here.